All right. Well, pretty much at this point, I have been doing some, like I said, some research on it as far as just the basic understanding of where it's come from, who's pushed it, stuff like that. As far as I understand it at this point, it seems to be of the Obama's education director put out as far as the race to the top and stuff like that they were looking to give the states grant money. So essentially they tie that in to say, you want to get grant money, you need to adopt this curriculum, and that's as far as they've really explained it. Would you say, do you have anything more to elaborate on that particular?
Oh, yes. Actually, the architects of Common Core are basically two men named Mark Tucker and David Coleman. Mark Tucker has been pushing for national curriculum since 1988. He wrote an infamous letter to Hillary Clinton in 1992 when Bill Clinton was elected. He basically laid out this plan back in 1992. This is a letter that it's in the Congressional Archive. It's very easy to research and look it up. It's very extensive, very long, but in it he actually mentions common standards that everyone can have for school and for work, and that there will be he called it an informational system. He couldn't have foretold how technologically we'd be advanced in our databases and data mining. It's very big right now. So that's where the whole data collection comes into this. He wanted the government to have an informational system starting from cradle to grave. He describes it that way, that they will have information on folks, and he thinks that's helpful to help people with education and work. I find it a little disturbing to have the government have that much information on us. He also actually specifically said that the executive branch should tie grant money to compel the states and cities to accept the standards. This was back in 1992.
Okay, I mean, most of my knowledge is basically coming from 2009 on. That's like kind of the base knowledge that I've obtained at this point. As far as the information for funding, I have read a lot into organizations that come up like Achieve. They mentioned the National Governors Association. They mentioned Bill Gates Foundation. What would you say now? I mean, I heard something to the tune of like a couple $2 billion that he specifically has funded towards this, even specifically in Pennsylvania, that he spent at least a couple billion. Maybe elaborate on that a little bit.
Oh yeah, Bill Gates has been involved with this since 2006. In 2004, though, he was involved with the UN and their Millennium Project, which basically calls for universal educational standards worldwide. He has been funding, though, all the organizations involved, including the National Governors Association and the other association of the chief school officers. He's given significant funding to them before they started, quote unquote, developing these standards. They say that because these two groups did it, it's state initiated. They're trade organizations. They're basically political lobbying groups for the states and for the school officials. They have no legislative power to do things for the states. They're just an advisory committee, essentially. So they received significant funding from Bill Gates before starting the development of these standards. Achieve is a group that's started by David Coleman, that other gentleman I spoke of. Those two groups hired Achieve to write the standards. So once again, we come back to the same two people who wanted to have this common standards. So and if Washington Post just did an excellent article showing all the organizations that the Gates Foundation has given money to. They're all the organizations that are supporting this now, like the PTA, like all the business organizations. There's hundreds of them that they're giving money to. And ALEC, which is considered a conservative group, they came out against this. They stopped being against it once they got a very large contribution from the Bill Gates Foundation. They just suddenly dropped it. So Bill Gates has his financial hooks into this. Now he believes in this, and I believe he's sincere and he thinks it's a good thing. But people need to be aware, that he is behind all this.
As far as now, I mean, some of my readings into our actual state here indicates that our governor, who, I mean, in most cases and in most circles, they consider him a conservative Republican. That's generally the understanding because of his, push to privatization for the liquor stores, the Castle Doctrine, things like that. It seems a bit out of character from everything I've understood at this point, but they seem to imply that him and the top House Republicans are pushing for this initiative in PA and basically going on and gushing about it as far as what I've read. I mean, do they even have a clue what they're supporting? Are they aware of any of this, or is it an ignorant stance, or do they actually have a clue what this initiative is?
Yeah, they do not know the forces that are behind this, and it's pretty obvious when you talk to the state. I talked to the chairman of the House, Representative Clymer. He's just going along with the talking points that the Education Department has presented for this. Now, it was the previous governor that first signed on to this, but they talked about it being politically neutral when the elections were coming up, saying that even the candidate running for governor agreed to this. I do not think that either man really looked into it. Remember, we agreed to these standards before they were even released. It was more the money. It was more the money. They couldn't pass up this huge chunk of money. We're struggling so much in Pennsylvania. Our school districts are struggling so much to pay their bills that it was just too enticing. And it sounds good. You hear the way it's described, it sounds great. So
that was definitely, if you really just go on to the actual website or to any groups for it, I mean, it's this transformative thing, and it seems that they really push the idea that it is, the states come up with this, it's the answer to George Bush's No Child Left Behind. I mean, that's generally the atmosphere I get every time I read anything, is that's kind of how it was passed on. Now, I mean, as far as, and I see both sides every time I look, as far as the initial push under, the current administration, that, in your own research, is it confirmed that it was pushed by these current education secretary with the race to the top, the funding? Like, I've only kind of found generalizations of that, and there's enough on the other side to say that, well, actually, it's this, that, or the other. But as far as your information that you've researched, what would you kind of elaborate on what you found specifically, like anything more than what I've...
Well, again, I think it's just that the funding was so important, and they wanted it. It doesn't matter whether it's Democrat or Republican. This is not a Democrat or Republican issue. This is actually a progressive versus small government people issue, I think. And a lot of progressives, whether they're Republicans or Democrats, think the experts have all the answers and that we should just listen to them without question. And sometimes that gets us into trouble because you don't necessarily understand the agendas behind the experts and what they're recommending and other things they may want that you don't see right away. And I think that's the problem. We don't look far enough into it.
As far as, we didn't actually get a chance to attend the hearings yesterday, but as far as what I was hearing, it basically seemed like it was a one-sided discussion. There seemed to be no, opponents or anything at the hearing. Did you happen to get a chance to attend as kind of a civilian attendee, kind of watching and get to hear anything that went on at that meeting, and kind of anything that relevant that you might be able to share with us from that?
I watched it stream live on PCN. And yes, it was very one-sided. One of the representatives even brought that up and asked the chairman, are we going to have a further meeting where we can maybe hear some criticisms? Because this was all very pro-Common Core, and he would not commit to that. One thing that became clear to me, and this was by design, we've already spent the money. They're basically telling the legislators that you don't really have any choice in this, because someone asked, what happens if we just decide we're not going to go through with this, we're not going to adopt it? They said, well, we've spent so much money, we'd have to, because we agreed with the federal government that we have to have this rigorous curriculum, we'd then have to come up with our own curriculum. And so they're basically telling them, we really can't say no at this point. It's as if there's strings attached, and the strings are already around the legislators' necks. And they really don't have a choice at this point. I mean, they're told it will be very, very difficult and very expensive if we back out at this point, because we've already agreed with the federal government that we're going to do a lot of the things that they wanted.
Well, I certainly appreciate you having a second to answer a few questions. We're going to be here for the remainder to kind of check things out, so we'll see how things go.
I appreciate you shining a light on this.
Yes, and I hope you enjoy the paper. The Scranton Edition is where I'm going to be putting the article in, so hopefully you get a chance to look it over.
Well, like I said, I think it's all about knowledge and educating people, so we can really make up our own minds.
Right.
Yeah, that's the point.